Well, we finally have a full day to work on the bikes, not just a little bit after work. So today's plan is to at least get one of these guys on the ground. If I could get both, that would be sick, but my goal is just at least one. But before we start putting the forks and all back on, I gotta swap over the kickstands and take off a couple of basic stuff here, like disconnect this brake line and that throttle cable and yada yada. I also printed myself a list of all the parts on that black bike. So we're gonna slowly check off the stuff on here. But yeah, let's get to it. So you'd think the impact would just do the job removing the kickstand, but no, I had to use the true and tested form of a giant stick on a ratchet. That's what ended up getting it off, not the impact, of course. So once I swapped those over, I started by removing the side covers so I could get to the seat. And once I got to the seat, I put the bolts back, started undoing the yellow gas tank, and just like the last one, I took that big block and just shoved it right under to keep it up, just so I don't have to disconnect any of the lines or anything. I started to remove the air box from the yellow bike. In order to get to all this stuff, it was definitely a much more difficult process compared to the black bike, because the black bike, everything's exposed with those air filters. But here, I actually have this whole box that I got to deal with, and inside the box there's a bunch of different sensors that I have to disconnect, and a tube going to the oil dump sponge of some sort. As you can see here, there's one sensor and there's that oil dump tube. But I just kept working on it, slow and steady, like I say. There's a lot more in the way to get to the throttle cables and brake switch wires and stuff than on that black one. The stock airbox just has like all these different connectors here. This blue one goes here, this green one goes there. On this side, there was the tube to catch this like oil. Very interesting. Yeah, like right there that I just disconnected. And the screw was such a pain because it was so deep in there to actually attach to the throttle bodies. I hope that's the correct term for what those are, the tubes, throttle bodies. Yeah, these guys. Yeah, so just I have to, unfortunately, remove all that just to get, I didn't want to really work on the engine-ish stuff until I fixed the front end, but I have to do this just to get to what all this stuff is attached to. But it'll be nice to replace later on, because here it's just a much more simple system. It's these uni air filters, and see, like, there's just everything right there. Nice and simple. So once I get rid of that and move it there, I won't ever have to deal with this crap again. So yeah, just slowly working away at that. Here I am just starting on the process of removing this air box. There's not really much to say. Helped my brother with laundry there for a second. But yeah, just working on this airbox, and there was a lot of cursing, a lot of cut up fingers. It was just a really big pain. A lot of screws that were really deep in the engine bay that were hard to reach. A lot of clips that were really annoying to unclip. You know the deal. Just that usual stuff. Okay, airbox is off, which has revealed what I need to disconnect. Looks like the brake switch is, it's obviously OEM, so it's just a plug that you unplug. There I have to actually splice and resplice stuff, which I'm probably just going to convert it to work with a plug in the future, because I love plugs way better than that, obviously. Yeah, and the throttle stuff goes there. Should be relatively straightforward. Just going to tune out and work on it. Sorry, I forgot to film completely. I got really in the zone there, but I didn't fully disconnect everything from the handlebar controls yet. I just kind of consolidated it better, and I'm just delaying the inevitable. The important part is I got rid of this spaghetti nest of the front brake system. Now that that's not in the way, I can actually start putting on the GSXR forks. Much more excited to do that. Definitely, because this part sucks. I didn't even bother disconnecting everything yet. I more just kind of started separating and moving to the side. Like I said, this part is way more interesting now. I was way more excited to actually start getting these forks on because visual progress, at least for me, really helps for motivation for a project. So it was just nice to know that I can finally see those gold forks on the yellow bike. Started by putting the triple tree on. It's just like one of those weird shaped nuts, a washer and another. And then you put on that custom CNC piece and finally another nut on top of that. That was all secured. I made sure the steering stabilizer was working well. Then I started putting the ignition on, and I ran into a weird issue where it wasn't quite lining up. Like, it was working fine, but it would just jiggle a little bit. So I just kept removing and putting it back on, messing with it, trying to get it to work properly. All right, we ran into our first issue where the ignition switch seems to be just a little too big. So, I mean, it fits fine and I was able to screw it in, but it still wiggles just a little bit. And more importantly, you can't lock it. Like the little lock cylinder doesn't line up there. So I can either shorten this piece here, or I can shorten the ignition switch piece, which I think I'm going to shorten the ignition one because it's just a hole and this piece is threaded. So it makes sense to shorten this one. But as you could tell, I like to delay stuff right out. I just really want to get this on the ground. So I'm going to leave it as is and we'll get to that later. So before I put the forks on, I have to refabricate this little headlight mount because it slides into the forks as they slide into the triple tree. The OEM one I measured is 2.5 inches. This one is 2. So I just need to drill one more new hole. That's pretty much it. Nothing crazy. So might just do that off camera and then get to installing them on the forks. Drilling holes is pretty easy. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to do it. I really didn't feel like I needed to film it, but got those holes drilled. I know. Amazing stuff. And then, I could finally slide them into the fork before sliding the fork fully through that custom CNC'd piece. It was really nice to see how all this gold looks on it. I feel like it complements it very well with the yellow. Maybe I'm just telling myself that. Regardless of how they look, I know it's just going to be such a nice improvement for this bike because that's one of the things that really messes with these SVs is just the handling. It feels a little floaty in the front. But yeah, just tightening up all the bolts, slowly locking them in the forks. And then I brought over the gauge cluster just to tighten that in place. It tightened into the mounts fine as expected. I was still using the original plates and the hole that they go into I didn't drill. And then just mocked up the front wheel. I tried to put it in, but I need to jack the bike up a bit. So this one isn't jacked up enough, so I'm going to need some help from my brother to lift it up a bit more so I can slide the rod through this wheel. So now it's the perfect time to stop and eat lunch. So I'll be back with that in a bit, hopefully. Hopefully I don't give up. All right, some time passed, had my lunch. My brother helped me lift it up and I got the wheel through the rod fine. And it's on the ground. There's the jack. So now we're just gonna probably continue with, the front end stuff, the fenders and whatnot. Slow and steady, as I say. Slow and steady. Slow and steady indeed. Took my time here. Got the front fender back on into place. I made sure to go slowly here because I didn't want to crack the carbon fiber or anything by over tightening stuff. And once I got that on, I tried to put the headlight up, but I noticed I ran into an issue where the headlight was just a little too big for the mounts I made. Sure, the spacing was correct, but the actual headlight was too wide, too fat. So I had to come up with a different solution here. I just stopped the hyperlapse and think for a sec because I need to do some napkin math. So these headlight brackets will not work with this OEM bracket, which I kind of suspected, but I was hoping maybe out of luck. The only issue was that it was 2.5 instead of 2 inches. But none of it works because the headlight hits this steering damper. So I did some napkin math, and right now this piece is only 1.5 inches long. I need it to be 2.25 inches. It's actually on this side, it'd be like that, and notched a little bit so it won't hit this here. And these little rods right here that extend out to hold this actual OEM headlight mount, I also did some napkin math for. These are currently only 3/4 inch. These little guys right here, I need it to be 1 3/4 inches. So I'm gonna run to the hardware store, get some of these, and do some cutting. And we'll see how long that takes me. Hopefully, at least by the end of the day, we'll have the headlight mounted. You know, it's definitely not like I suspected. It would be sick, but I just wanted this one. I mean, it's on the ground. Thank God we got that. But I want it to be at least complete-ish. Just the headlight stuff, not even this. Just mounted. So yeah, that's probably going to be the majority of my time right now is fabricating this up to the hardware store. Okay, I'm back from the store. I grabbed myself a piece of steel, 4 of these 1-inch steel spacers, 4 1/2-inch steel spacers because they didn't have any 1.5, and I needed 4, but there were only there's only this one pack of these 2 M6 160 millimeter length. I think it's millimeter length. So I still need to buy 1 more of these pack of 2, but my napkin math was correct, and this is obviously still the old bracket, but the space between it is nice and correct for these OEM headlight mounts. And why I'm so persistent on using these OEM headlight mounts is because they mock up to these OEM brackets that hold the windshield up and the little fairing for the windshield. So obviously I still want to keep all of that, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I used the ones that the gentleman fabricated for that black motorcycle. So yeah, luckily these work. These are all good, but I think I'm pretty exhausted, so I'm gonna stop for today. I got it on the ground, so I'm pretty happy about that. I got the airbox removed and some stuff there, and I kind of have a plan now of how to get these headlights working. Yeah, so see you next clip, I guess. Okay. It is, oh, I don't like holding it like that. There we go, that's better. It's the next clip for you. So for me, it's the next day. Off camera, I ended up doing a decent amount for this bike. Primarily, I got it on the ground, and to achieve that, you know, I had to put on the forks, put on these headlight mounts. These stock clip-ons, they're not the kind that you can just attach to the fork. You have to slide the fork through them. So I had to actually get a bunch of stuff off of these because, you know, they used to be on that bike. Yeah, to get these prepped for the black one. But this one's starting to take shape. Kind of looks cool without anything on it. I don't know. It looks very, very nice and simple. I like that. Anyways, like I talked about in the last clip, you know, I started to mock this up and I have a general plan for the headlight, but I sat and thought about it, and I feel like the more intelligent thing to do is to actually get all the handlebar stuff ready for both of these bikes before working on actually putting on the headlight, because that should be the very last thing, right? Especially since I'm sure I'm going to have to mock up something for the headlight here as well. Yeah, so let's just keep the ball rolling. We'll start removing these lines to swapping between the two bikes. This was by far the worst part of this whole build, was trying to get these throttle cables out. And if you're not aware how a throttle cable works, is it's kind of the steel line that has a metal cylinder at the end of it, and you thread these cylinders into a wheel that controls the actuation of the throttle valves. That sounds really smart. Honestly, I don't quite know. That's probably just some made up nonsense. Anyways, it spins a wheel that opens up the throttles. And a smart man would have removed everything in his way to get to these wheels. I am not a smart man. Instead of doing that, I decided to cram my hand down and work underneath everything that was on top of it. Did it work? Sure, it worked. I eventually got them out, but my hand was all cut up and I was sweating and swearing. And it definitely just would have been much simpler to remove the things that were in the way. But oh well, you live, you learn. I got them out. So in the end, that's all that really mattered. Oh my goodness, that was the absolute worst thing I have ever done. That was so atrocious. In hindsight, now that I was looking back at it, all I really needed to do was take off these throttle bodies, but instead I was like, hey, let's just remove the throttle cables underneath all of this without removing anything. And I did it, but I just really banged and cut up my hands in the process. But throttle cable's out. I put it over there, so. And I also decided to actually just keep the hydraulic clutch for now, just because I noticed. Oh my god, I almost tripped. I noticed over here it's just leaking a little bit, and I don't want to deal with. Honestly, I just don't want to deal with that right now. So this clutch can always be swapped later after I mount everything up. It's not the end of the world because it simply goes right onto the clip-ons. I don't need to remove the clip-ons, so. Okay, I think I can put the clip-ons now and start attaching other things. So here I am putting the clip-ons back on. I'm just kind of preparing them by getting the bolts. The nice thing about these clip-ons is you don't have to put the fork through them. You can just bolt them around the fork. Like the actual circle splits into two pieces. Because I know like the stock clip-ons, for example, you actually have to slide through the fork. You can't just split into two pieces like that. So it's nice. I'm just getting these on, and you know, it was pretty straightforward. I then started working on the hand controls, and while tightening it up, I noticed that it seemed that there was like a little bit of excess plastic on it that would be used. It was like a nub that would be used in the stock clip-ons, so it wasn't quite fitting here. I didn't shave it down or anything quite yet. I just ended up, you know, attaching it with just the slightest little bit of gap. I kept going back and forth between the bikes to just verify if that's actually the problem that I was facing or if I was going crazy, and it was true. The other one, the guy shaved that little nub off the plastic so it fit these clip-ons. So this one, I'd probably have to do the same, but I skipped that for now. And once I got that on, I mounted up this hydraulic clutch back. Yeah, I do still want to switch them over, but you know, it's super simple to put on and off. I just wanted it out of the way, so I put it back up. Then I was working on the mirrors a little bit, just tightening those guys up. Once I got the mirrors all tight, I shifted my focus over to the black bike. I wish I could tell you what I was doing there, but you know, you're seeing the same footage that I'm seeing right now. So I can't really tell. I think I was disconnecting like the ignition switch or something, or maybe messing with something there. I don't know. Really hard to tell. But once I finished there, I moved my focus over to rewiring the Brembo master cylinder because, you know, it's got its own wire and I need to feed it into the SV1000's wiring system. I made a little slit and I tried to clean it up as much as I can by threading it through the already existing shielding for the wiring. And once I got it through, I cut everything up like I needed to, crimped everything down, combined the two wires together, and then I started to bond them together with a lighter. I have this kind of like, it's like has built-in solder that you melt and then it melts the two wires together. And the lighter got really hot, so I had to switch to using a glove there. Didn't want to burn my fingers. Finished that up, wrapped it in electrical cable, and it was looking good, you know? Definitely very close to factory, so I was happy. And once I got that new brake cable made, I went ahead and started mounting these steel braided lines to the GSXR calipers. First by attaching them to the clip-ons. I had to attach the actual ignition switch. Then I went ahead and I mounted the Brembo master cylinder. I had to play around with it a little bit just because with the throttle cables, the ignition switch, and the cylinder in the way, I had to kind of move each one back and forth until there was a point where they weren't rubbing into each other. I had a caliper set that pushes back the brake pads, but it's meant for a car, so I kind of had to wedge it in a weird way to get these calipers pushed back, and in the process I kept checking the brake reservoir to make sure nothing was spilling over. If you can tell in the video, it's A, black, so it's really dirty, and B, really high up on the level, so I had to make sure it didn't spill over. But thankfully it didn't, pushing them both back. Mounted them up without an issue. I used this very, very dirty paint splattered chair to hold the calipers up, so I'm not just putting all the strain in the cables. Definitely don't want to do that. And once I finished up there, I switched my focus over to the black SV. Started with taking off that mirror, then I put on the stock throttle with the cables. I didn't attach the cables or anything, I just sent them through the frame there where they're meant to go. Then I went ahead and I attached the turn signal switch. This is the one with the shaved plastic, so I didn't put it on there like really tight or mocked it up well. I just kind of put it on there so it'd be there. And then I went ahead, brought the chair over, and brought out the calipers for this set of forks. These are the stock ones with the stock lines and the stock lever. Same story as the other bike. I had to kind of move everything around to make sure nothing was rubbing into each other. Had to unscrew and screw things back and forth. But yeah, eventually I got that situated, so I went ahead and I started mounting the calipers. The one thing I like about the set here is it's got this one spot on the right fork that you saw me tightening where it kind of is like a focus point before the cable splits into two. The steel braided ones is two separate cables all the way to the master cylinder. Obviously that's better, but just aesthetic wise, the one cable is nice. I have to give it props for that. All the front end accessories are mounted on the yellow bike and on the black bike right here. The only thing I did not mount was this clutch lever because I'm going to try my best to put it on the yellow bike, but I'm just not emotionally ready to deal with that whole leak. And you know what? I'm going to save that for when we're working on engine side of things. But now is fabrication stuff. So I have to figure out how to mount the headlight up here. And I already figured out how to do it here, so I just have to build those little brackets out of that steel that I bought. Hopefully my goal today is having both of the headlights secured, shining, and working, and all of the hand controls working except the throttle cables, because I'm not wiring that in right now. I gotta like mess with the throttle bodies anyway, so there's no reason for me to try to hook these up right now. But I do want, like the brake switch, make sure that works, and make sure the turn signals, the horn, yada yada works. Same on this one, except not the throttle, and obviously, I mean, I guess this should work, but It's just not mounted. But everything else, you know, brake light should work, turn signals, headlights, all that. So yeah, let's get to fabricating. That's our next move for these two boys right here. All right, so we got very lucky here. Turns out that this fits so perfectly with these fork mounts. I actually don't need to fabricate anything. I can just bolt it right on, which, oh, that's sick. That is super sick. I'm really psyched about that. The only thing I need to do is get some spare nuts, because this one is welded on, so then there's a gap. So I just need to get another one of these nuts to put right here, so there is no more gap. And another one on this side. So I have 4 total bolts, and I'll need 6 total nuts. That is so sick. I'm so glad I don't have to fab anything up for this. Okay, cool. I'm gonna see if I have any spare ones. If not, I'm going to run to the hardware store. Luckily, I did have a couple nuts that fit. It's always good to have your spare nuts. And with the spare nuts in hand, I started to prep everything to get this headlight on. And it was going smooth, you know, nothing out of the ordinary. I just started to mount everything up and screwed in some bolts and nuts. Not a lot to talk about here. I really just was mounting those. I ended up trying to twist the bracket that held up the gauge cluster, because I noticed that does not fit on there. I'd have to fab something up. I already had like brackets in place that I used before, so I just kind of crushed them to make them flat. But unfortunately, that didn't really work out for me. Here I am crushing the other pair and actually bending it back too, and it just was not working out. While we were lucky with the headlight mount on this black bike, we are not so lucky when it comes to the mount for the gauges. We're gonna have to fabricate something up for that. And in typical Roman fashion, I'm not gonna do that quite yet. Instead, I'm gonna fabricate what I already know that I need to fabricate for this yellow bike. So, gonna take a pause on this and work on this instead. It's definitely exciting to actually fabricate something again. This is super simple. It's technically fabrication, so don't hate on me. But, you know, I drew up a rectangle, measured it twice to make sure the dimensions were good, and all I have is this angle grinder to do the job, so I went ahead and loaded up the blade and went to work. I'm gonna cut this outside. That's probably a much smarter idea. Yeah, I'm gonna cut this outside. I'll be right back. I did the best I could using an angle grinder and a glass table as a workbench and a block to hold it down. I really don't have a lot of tools, but after I did that, I went ahead and went back inside and I got to drilling the holes in these brackets. They were a bit of a pain. I had to really set in there and squirt some WD-42 just to really help lubricate and cool down the metal as I drilled through. But eventually, you know, with time and patience, I was able to drill through all the holes fine. Whew, okay. Fabbed up these brackets. They're nice and extended, so now it can hold the OEM headlight without bumping into this steering damper. I just gotta file them down so they're not sharp and paint them so they don't rust. But that's for another day. I am absolutely beat, but I made some good progress today. That's where I'm gonna leave off today, and the show must go on. So we'll carry on the next clip. Hopefully it's not too far in the future. Instead of showing the next clip, I just ended up deciding to cut the video short here. It's getting a little long, so I appreciate you listening and tuning in. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Next video will be out soon. I am currently working on the bike as I edit this video. Just kind of go back and forth. Thanks, guys. Take care.